Fake HOA cops slap black man's wife. Navy SEAL husband makes them regret it. It started with what looked like a routine visit from the neighborhood's HOA officers. Two men in uniforms, badges shining, walked confidently up the driveway of a quiet suburban home. But something about them didn't feel right. Within minutes, their so-called inspection turned into a barrage of accusations, threats, and then the unthinkable. One of them raised his hand and struck the black homeowner's wife across the face. What they didn't know, though, was that her husband wasn't just any man. He was a retired Navy SEAL, trained to handle situations far more dangerous than this. And when he stepped forward, everything changed. Marcus and Tasha Williams had worked hard to build a good life. After years of sacrifice, Marcus finally retired from military service, closing a chapter of grueling deployments, long nights, and unshakable memories. He chose peace, buying a modest home in a suburban neighborhood where he could focus on his family. Tasha loved her garden, spending afternoons tending to the roses along their driveway. She greeted neighbors warmly, always hopeful their presence would be welcomed. But beneath the manicured lawns and carefully painted fences of this community, Marcus and Tasha had begun to notice something unsettling. Stares lingered too long. Comments carried undertones of hostility. They were treated as outsiders in a place they called home. Still, Marcus stayed calm. His military discipline taught him patience. He wanted to give the neighborhood the benefit of the doubt. But the HOA, the Homeowners Association, seemed intent on making life miserable. Petty fines, harsh letters, and veiled threats stacked up, always targeting them for the smallest infractions. On the surface, the HOA claimed to enforce rules equally. But in reality, Marcus and Tasha were being singled out, reminded again and again that they didn't belong. Marcus knew racism when he saw it. He'd fought for his country overseas, but now he was fighting a different kind of battle at home. One hot afternoon, as Tasha trimmed her flowers, two men in dark uniforms approached. Their badges gleamed, but something about their presence felt off. They carried themselves not as protectors of the community, but as predators hunting their prey. The men introduced themselves as HOA compliance officers. Their voices dripped with authority, but their tone carried no respect. They barked about alleged violations: grass too tall, garden tools left visible, a driveway not swept to their liking. Tasha listened politely, trying to explain that everything was in order. But the men weren't interested in explanations. They circled her yard like vultures, pointing out imaginary flaws, writing down notes on clipboards, and muttering among themselves. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some curious, others entertained by the spectacle. No one stepped in. This wasn't about violations. This was about intimidation. Marcus, inside the house, noticed the commotion. He watched quietly from the window, jaw tightening, but he stayed back, for now. He'd promised Tasha he wouldn't let his military instincts take over every situation. He wanted to trust the system, even if it seemed stacked against them. The men grew more aggressive. They accused Tasha of violating rules that didn't exist, mocking her responses. Their tone shifted from official to outright cruel, as if they enjoyed watching her squirm under pressure. Then came the racial undertones. Snide comments about people like you bringing down property values. Questions laced with venom. Are you even supposed to live here? The message was clear. They weren't enforcing rules, they were enforcing exclusion. Tasha's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. She reminded them that she and Marcus owned the house outright, that they'd paid their dues like everyone else. Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. And that's when it happened. One of the men, sneering, stepped forward and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed down the quiet street. For a moment, time froze. Tasha's hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. The men smirked, as if daring her to resist. They believed their fake uniforms and badges made them untouchable. What they didn't see was Marcus stepping through the front door. Marcus moved with the calm precision of a man who'd faced chaos before. His posture was steady, his gaze unshakable, but inside, a storm raged. He'd fought enemies overseas, but seeing his wife assaulted in broad daylight by men masquerading as authority, it awakened something fierce in him. The men turned, surprised by his sudden presence. They expected outrage, shouting, maybe a phone call. What they got instead was silence, controlled, dangerous silence. Marcus closed the distance in seconds. With one swift, calculated motion, he disarmed the first man, ripping the clipboard and fake badge from his chest. The second man lunged, but Marcus's training took over. He moved like water, striking with precision, every move practiced 1,000 times before. The fight was over before it began. Both men lay crumpled on the ground, groaning in pain, their arrogance shattered as quickly as their false sense of power. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows gasped. Some stepped outside, suddenly emboldened by the sight of justice served. Marcus didn't boast. He didn't shout. He simply stood over the men, breathing evenly, his presence alone enough to silence the street. In that moment, everyone saw him not as a target of harassment, but as a man who refused to be broken. The fake officers begged, but Marcus had already called the real police. When officers arrived, the truth unraveled. The badges were counterfeit, the uniforms stitched together from online purchases. These weren't compliance officers. They were HOA bullies playing dress-up, desperate to enforce their racist vision of control. The aftermath shook the neighborhood. The two men were arrested, facing charges for impersonating officers, assault, and harassment. The HOA, once seen as untouchable, came under investigation. Years of shady practices unraveled, fines that targeted minority families, discriminatory enforcement, and abuse of power. For Marcus and Tasha, justice brought relief, but it didn't erase the pain of that day. Tasha's cheek healed, but the memory lingered. The humiliation, the fear, the reminder that even in her own yard, she wasn't safe from hatred. Marcus held her close, reminding her that their strength wasn't just in surviving, but in standing tall against injustice. He hadn't wanted to fight again, not after years of war, but sometimes battles come to your doorstep, and when they do, you must decide whether to bow to fear or confront it head-on. The neighborhood changed after that day. Some residents who had stayed silent began questioning their own complicity. Others doubled down, resentful that their power had been challenged. But no one could deny the truth anymore. The HOA's mask had been ripped off, exposing the ugliness beneath. And as Marcus looked around his community, he wondered how many more stories like theirs remained hidden, how many more families had been bullied into silence. Because the truth is, racism doesn't always come wearing white hoods or shouting slurs. Sometimes it hides behind badges, rules, and uniforms, pretending to enforce order while really spreading hate. So the question remains, when power is abused and prejudice hides in plain sight, will you look away or will you stand up and fight?